Blood and Betrayal, the Byzantine Empire's Palace Intrigues, 527 to 1453 CE. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's imperial legacy, perfected the art of palace conspiracy over nearly 1,000 years of rule. Within the sacred walls of the great palace of Constantinople, emperors rose and fell not through battlefield valor, but through whispered plots, poisoned chalices, and midnight assassinations. The very architecture of power bred paranoia, as purple-born princes and ambitious courtiers navigated a labyrinth where survival demanded cunning above all else. The purple-born conspirators, the concept of being born to the purple, literally born in the purple chamber of the imperial palace, supposedly guaranteed legitimacy, yet it often signed a death warrant. Emperor Basil I, known as the Macedonian, exemplified the brutal pragmatism required for survival. Rising from peasant origins, he murdered his way to the throne in 867 CE by assassinating Emperor Michael III, his former patron and drinking companion. Basil's method was chillingly personal. During a palace feast, he and his co-conspirators cornered Michael in his chambers and hacked him to death with swords, claiming the emperor had become a threat to the empire's stability. The succession that followed demonstrated how imperial paranoia became institutionalized. Basil systematically eliminated potential rivals, including his own eldest son, Constantine, whom he suspected of plotting against him. Historical accounts suggest Basil arranged a hunting accident in 879 CE, where Constantine was trampled by deer during a staged hunt. The emperor's grief was reportedly genuine, yet he had orchestrated his son's death to preserve his dynasty, a contradiction that epitomized Byzantine court psychology. The empress who ruled through murder. Perhaps no figure embodies Byzantine palace intrigue more than Empress Irene of Athens, who ruled from 797 to 802 CE as the first woman to hold imperial power in her own right. Her path to the throne was paved with the systematic elimination of male relatives, culminating in the most shocking act of imperial violence, the blinding of her own son, Emperor Constantine VI, in 797 CE. Irene's conspiracy began years earlier when she served as regent for the young Constantine. As he matured and began asserting independence, she orchestrated a campaign of character assassination, spreading rumors about his military incompetence and moral failings. When Constantine attempted to remove her from power in 790 CE, Irene activated a network of loyal generals and court officials she had cultivated through years of careful patronage. The final act occurred in the Purple Chamber itself. On July 15, 797 CE, Irene's agents seized Constantine and, using red-hot irons, destroyed his eyes, the traditional Byzantine method of rendering someone unfit to rule while keeping them alive as a warning to others. Contemporary chronicler Theophanes recorded that Constantine's screams echoed through the palace corridors, and that his mother watched the proceedings from behind a silk curtain, never showing emotion. The poison chalice tradition, Byzantine palace culture, developed poisoning into a refined art form, with the imperial court maintaining official poison tasters and antidote specialists. The most notorious case involved Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, whose reign ended not on the battlefield of Manzikert in 1071 CE, but through a carefully orchestrated poisoning campaign led by the powerful Ducas family. After Romanos's capture and release by the Seljuk Turks, he returned to find his throne usurped by Michael VII Ducas. Rather than face civil war, the Ducas family chose subterfuge. They invited Romanos to negotiations under the pretense of peaceful abdication, but court physician John Italos, secretly in Ducas' employ, administered a slow-acting poison during the ceremonial wine service. The poison, likely a mercury-based compound mixed with arsenic, took weeks to kill Romanos, causing symptoms that mimicked natural illness. Historical accounts describe his gradual deterioration, hair loss, severe abdominal pain, and eventual organ failure. The Ducas family publicly mourned his sudden illness, while privately celebrating the elimination of their rival without the messy publicity of execution or battle. The Varangian Guard, protectors or assassins. The elite Varangian Guard, composed primarily of Viking warriors, served as the emperor's personal bodyguard, but occasionally became instruments of palace coups. Their foreign origin supposedly guaranteed loyalty, yet several emperors discovered that gold spoke louder than oaths of service. Emperor Nikephoros II Phocas learned this lesson fatally in 969 CE. His wife, Theophano, and his nephew John Tzimiskes orchestrated his assassination using corrupted Varangian guardsmen. The plot unfolded during the Christmas season, when palace security traditionally relaxed. Theophano provided the conspirators with detailed knowledge of the emperor's private chambers and daily routines. On the night of December 10, 969 CE, bribed Varangian guards allowed assassins to enter the imperial quarters. They found Nikephoros sleeping on the floor, a habit he had developed from his military campaigns, and killed him with sword thrusts to the head and chest. The murder scene was staged to suggest a robbery gone wrong, but the precision of the wounds and the lack of stolen valuables revealed the political nature of the crime. The blinding epidemic, the Byzantine practice of blinding political rivals, reached epidemic proportions during the 10th and 11th centuries, creating a palace culture where physical mutilation served as both punishment and political strategy. Emperor Basil II, ironically called the Bulgar Slayer, demonstrated this brutality not only against foreign enemies but within his own court. When the powerful Skleros family attempted a rebellion in 976 CE, Basil's response was methodical and terrifying. Rather than simply executing the conspirators, he ordered the systematic blinding of all male members of the family above age 12. Court records describe the procedure. Victims were held down while heated metal rods destroyed their corneas, leaving them alive but permanently disabled and dependent on imperial mercy. The psychological impact extended beyond the immediate victims. Palace courtiers lived in constant fear that a misinterpreted comment or suspected disloyalty could result in similar mutilation. This created a culture of extreme sycophancy, where nobles competed to demonstrate loyalty through increasingly elaborate displays of submission and mutual denunciation. The final conspiracy, 1453, the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, faced not only external enemies, but internal treachery as the Ottoman siege of Constantinople reached its climax. Genoese merchant Giovanni Giustiniani, supposedly commanding the city's defenses, secretly negotiated with Sultan Mehmed II for personal safety in exchange for strategic intelligence about Byzantine defensive positions. On May 28, 1453, the night before the final assault, several Byzantine nobles attempted a last-minute coup, believing that surrendering the city while removing Constantine might preserve their lives and property. The conspiracy involved opening the gates to Ottoman forces while assassinating the emperor during the confusion. The plot failed when Constantine discovered the plan through loyal servants. In a final act of imperial defiance, he chose to die fighting rather than flee or surrender. His body was found among the defenders at the St. Romanus Gate, identified only by the purple boots that marked his imperial rank. The Byzantine Empire ended as it had existed for over a millennium, in blood, betrayal, and the pursuit of power at any cost. The legacy of Byzantine palace intrigue influenced European court culture for centuries, establishing templates for political assassination, succession manipulation, and the systematic use of violence as a tool of governance that would echo through the halls of power from Versailles to the Kremlin. The Borgia legacy, Renaissance Italy's most notorious dynasty, 1455 to 1519. In the sun-drenched palaces of Renaissance Italy, where art and learning flourished alongside unprecedented political sophistication, the Borgia family elevated court intrigue to a deadly art form. Their Spanish origins and papal connections provided the perfect foundation for a dynasty that would become synonymous with poison, murder, and sexual scandal. Under the leadership of Pope Alexander VI and his children Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia, the Vatican itself became the epicenter of the most elaborate and ruthless conspiracy network in European history. The Spanish invasion of the Vatican, Rodrigo Borgia's ascension to the papal throne as Alexander VI in 1492, marked the beginning of the most corrupt pontificate in church history. His election itself was achieved through systematic bribery, with Borgia purchasing votes from cardinals using a combination of gold, benefices, and promises of future favors. Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere later testified that Borgia's agents distributed over 100,000 ducats in bribes during the conclave, an astronomical sum equivalent to millions in modern currency. Once installed as Pope, Alexander VI transformed the Vatican into a family enterprise dedicated to advancing Borgia interests through any means necessary. He openly acknowledged his illegitimate children, appointed family members to crucial positions, and used papal resources to fund military campaigns designed to carve out secular kingdoms for his offspring. This nepotism reached unprecedented levels when he created Cesare Borgia as a cardinal at age 18, despite his complete lack of religious vocation or theological training. The Pope's relationship with his mistress Giulia Farnese, known as Giulia la Bella, scandalized even Renaissance Rome's jaded society. Farnese lived openly in the Vatican, bore Alexander's children, and influenced papal appointments. Her brother, Alessandro Farnese, received a cardinal's hat at age 25, directly through her intervention, later becoming Pope Paul III. This arrangement demonstrated how the Borgias weaponized sexuality and family connections to build an unassailable power network. Cesare Borgia, the Prince of Poison. Cesare Borgia, Alexander VI's most ambitious son, abandoned his cardinal's robes in 1498 to pursue secular power, becoming the first person in history to resign from the cardinalate. His transformation from reluctant cleric to ruthless warlord exemplified the Borgia approach to power: pragmatic, violent, and utterly without moral constraints. Cesare's military campaigns in the Papal States and Romagna were characterized by strategic brilliance and shocking brutality. His conquest of Faenza in 1501 demonstrated his methods. After promising safe passage to the city's young ruler, Astorre Manfredi, Cesare had him strangled in Rome's Castel Sant'Angelo. The murder was carried out by Cesare's personal assassin, Miguel da Corella, known as Don Micheletto, who specialized in making deaths appear accidental or natural. The most notorious example of Cesare's cunning occurred at Senigallia on December 31, 1502, when he eliminated 4 rival condottieri who had conspired against him. Inviting them to a New Year's celebration under the pretense of reconciliation, Cesare had them arrested during the feast and executed before dawn. Vitellozzo Vitelli and Oliverotto da Fermo were strangled with a silk cord, the preferred Borgia method that left no obvious wounds, while Paolo and Francesco Orsini were imprisoned and later poisoned. Cesare's personal involvement in these murders was documented by contemporary observers, including Niccolò Machiavelli, who served as Florentine envoy to Cesare's court. Machiavelli's dispatches describe Cesare's cold calculation and his ability to compartmentalize violence as a necessary tool of statecraft. These observations would later influence Machiavelli's political philosophy in The Prince, where Cesare appears as the model for effective, if immoral, leadership. The Borgia poison, Cantarella. The Borgias' reputation for poisoning was built on their alleged use of cantarella, a mysterious compound that supposedly could kill quickly or slowly, depending on dosage. While the exact composition remains debated, contemporary accounts suggest it contained arsenic, antimony, and possibly phosphorus, creating a substance that could mimic various natural illnesses. The most significant poisoning attributed to the Borgias was the death of Cardinal Adriano Castellesi in 1503. Castellesi had accumulated enormous wealth through his various benefices, making him an attractive target for papal confiscation. During a dinner at the Vatican, he reportedly consumed wine that had been treated with cantarella, experiencing symptoms that began as mild stomach discomfort and progressed to violent convulsions and death within hours. What made Borgia poisonings particularly insidious was their integration into the social rituals of Renaissance court life. Dinner invitations, wine tastings, and gift exchanges all became potential assassination opportunities. The family employed a network of servants, cooks, and wine stewards who could introduce poison at various stages of food preparation and service, making detection nearly impossible. Giovanni Sforza, Lucrezia Borgia's first husband, claimed that his wife had attempted to poison him during their marriage, leading to his flight from Rome in 1497. While Sforza's accusations were likely motivated by political considerations, they reflected the genuine fear that the Borgia name inspired among Italian nobility. The mere possibility of Borgia involvement in a death was often sufficient to achieve political objectives without actual violence. Lucrezia Borgia, the poisonous rose. Lucrezia Borgia, perhaps the most maligned woman in Renaissance history, served as both victim and instrument of her family's ambitions. Her 3 marriages were arranged solely for political advantage, with each union designed to advance Borgia interests through strategic alliances or territorial acquisitions. Her first marriage to Giovanni Sforza in 1493 was annulled in 1497 when the Sforza alliance became inconvenient. The annulment proceedings revealed the cynical nature of Borgia family planning. Alexander VI claimed the marriage had never been consummated, forcing Lucrezia to undergo humiliating medical examinations to prove her virginity. Sforza's public protests that he had indeed consummated the marriage led to threats against his life, ultimately forcing him to sign documents confirming his own impotence. Lucrezia's second marriage to Alfonso of Aragon in 1498 ended in murder when Alfonso's continued existence threatened Borgia relations with France. On July 15, 1500, Alfonso was attacked by unknown assailants while leaving St. Peter's Basilica, suffering severe wounds but surviving the initial assault. While recovering in the Vatican under Lucrezia's care, he was strangled in his bed, allegedly by Cesare's assassin Don Micheletto. Contemporary accounts describe Lucrezia's reaction to Alfonso's murder as genuine grief, suggesting she had developed real affection for her second husband. However, her rapid recovery and third marriage to Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, in 1501 demonstrated her ability to subordinate personal feelings to family interests. This marriage proved more successful, both politically and personally, as Lucrezia established herself as a patron of arts and letters while maintaining her family's political influence. The Banquet of Chestnuts, Scandal and Power. The infamous Banquet of Chestnuts, held in the Vatican on October 30, 1501, exemplified the Borgia family's contempt for conventional morality and their use of scandal as a tool of intimidation. Organized by Cesare Borgia and attended by Pope Alexander VI, the event featured 50 Roman courtesans competing in various sexual acts for prizes of clothing and jewelry. Contemporary chronicler Johannes Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies, recorded the event in his diary, describing how the courtesans danced naked around chestnuts scattered on the floor before engaging in public sexual acts with Vatican servants and guests. The Pope and his son reportedly observed the proceedings while keeping score and distributing prizes. While some historians question the accuracy of Burchard's account, the banquet's symbolic significance is undeniable. By hosting such an event in the papal palace, the Borgias demonstrated their complete rejection of Christian moral authority and their confidence in their political invulnerability. The scandal served multiple purposes. It intimidated potential enemies, bonded participants through shared transgression, and established the Borgias as beyond conventional social constraints. The banquet also revealed the Borgia understanding of power as performance. By publicly violating the most sacred taboos of Christian society, they demonstrated that traditional moral and religious authorities could not touch them. This psychological warfare was as effective as their physical violence in maintaining control over the papal court and Italian politics. The downfall, August 1503. The Borgia dynasty's rapid collapse began with a dinner party on August 5, 1503, at the villa of Cardinal Adriano Cornetto. Both Pope Alexander VI and Cesare Borgia fell violently ill after the meal, with symptoms consistent with severe poisoning. Alexander died on August 18th, while Cesare survived but remained critically ill for weeks. The irony was not lost on contemporary observers. The family that had built its power through poisoning had apparently fallen victim to their own methods. While some historians suggest the illness was caused by malaria, the timing and symptoms strongly suggest deliberate poisoning, possibly by Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, who had been Alexander's longtime enemy and would soon become Pope Julius II. Alexander's death immediately triggered the collapse of Borgia power. Without papal protection, Cesare's enemies moved quickly to reclaim their territories and settle old scores. His condottieri abandoned him, his treasury was confiscated, and his carefully constructed alliance network disintegrated within weeks. Cesare's final years were spent in exile and imprisonment, first in Spain and later in the Kingdom of Navarre, where he died in 1507 during a minor siege. His death in battle, fighting as a common soldier rather than a prince, symbolized the complete reversal of Borgia fortunes. Legacy of fear and fascination. The Borgia legacy extended far beyond their actual political achievements, establishing templates for political manipulation that influenced European court culture for centuries. Their systematic use of poison, sexual scandal, and family networks as tools of statecraft created a model that would be emulated by ambitious dynasties across Europe. More significantly, the Borgias demonstrated how traditional institutions, in their case the Catholic Church, could be completely subverted to serve personal ambition. Their transformation of the papacy into a family business presaged similar developments in other European monarchies, where royal power became increasingly personalized and divorced from traditional moral constraints. The Renaissance ideal of the Renaissance prince, sophisticated, cultured, and utterly ruthless, found its perfect embodiment in the Borgia family, whose combination of artistic patronage and political violence epitomized the era's contradictions and possibilities. The Romanov curse, Imperial Russia's century of blood, 1801–1918. The Romanov dynasty's final century unfolded as a Greek tragedy written in blood and betrayal, where each generation seemed destined to repeat the violent patterns of their predecessors. From the midnight murder of Paul the Fern in 1801 to the basement execution of Nicholas II and his family in 1918, the Russian imperial court became a stage for increasingly desperate conspiracies as autocracy struggled against the forces of modernity, revolution, and its own internal contradictions. The Midnight Coup, the murder of Paul Fern, 1801. Emperor Paul I's assassination on March 23, 1801, established the template for Romanov palace intrigue, a conspiracy born from the collision between imperial paranoia and noble desperation, executed with military precision and justified through claims of state necessity. Paul's 4-year reign had transformed the Russian court into a theater of terror, where arbitrary arrests, sudden exiles, and capricious punishments created an atmosphere of constant fear among the nobility. The conspiracy against Paul originated in the highest circles of the imperial government, led by Count Nikita Panin, vice-chancellor of the empire, and General Levin Bennigsen, a Hanoverian officer who commanded Paul's personal guard. Their motivations were both personal and political. Paul's erratic policies had alienated the military establishment, while his attempts to centralize power threatened the traditional privileges of the aristocracy. The plot's most crucial element was the tacit approval of Paul's eldest son, the future Alexander I. While Alexander never explicitly sanctioned his father's murder, he was aware of the conspiracy and chose not to warn Paul or take preventive action. This passive complicity would haunt Alexander for the remainder of his reign, contributing to the mystical religiosity and psychological instability that characterized his later years. On the night of the assassination, approximately 60 conspirators, including officers of the Semenovsky and Preobrazhensky Guards regiments, entered the Mikhailovsky castle through passages provided by palace servants. They found Paul in his bedroom, where he had barricaded himself behind furniture in a futile attempt at protection. Contemporary accounts describe a chaotic struggle in which Paul was first struck with a sword, then strangled with a silk scarf, the traditional method for disposing of Russian royalty that left minimal physical evidence. The immediate aftermath revealed the conspiracy's sophisticated planning. Within hours of Paul's death, Alexander I was proclaimed emperor, key military units were secured, and potential opposition figures were arrested or neutralized. The official cause of death was listed as apoplexy, maintaining the fiction of natural death while everyone understood the political reality. The Decembrist Conspiracy, Revolution from Above, 1825. The death of Alexander I in 1825 precipitated the most significant palace conspiracy in Russian history, the Decembrist Uprising, which represented the first organized attempt to limit autocratic power through constitutional means. The conspiracy emerged from the unique circumstances of Alexander's sudden death in Taganrog and the confusion surrounding the succession between his brothers Constantine and Nicholas. The Decembrist movement had been developing for years within the officer corps of the Russian army, influenced by exposure to Western European ideas during the Napoleonic Wars. Secret societies like the Union of Salvation and the Union of Welfare had created networks of liberal-minded officers who envisioned transforming Russia into a constitutional monarchy or republic. The conspiracy's leaders included some of Russia's most distinguished military officers, Colonel Pavel Pestel, who commanded the Vyatka infantry regiment, Prince Sergei Trubetskoy, a veteran of the 1812 campaign, and Kondraty Ryleyev, a poet and civil servant who provided intellectual leadership to the movement. Their plans called for forcing the new emperor to accept constitutional limitations on autocratic power, backed by military units under their command. The critical moment came on December 26, 1825, when Nicholas I was scheduled to receive the oath of allegiance from the army and government. The conspirators planned to have their regiments refuse the oath and demand constitutional reform, supported by a manifesto declaring the end of serfdom and the establishment of civil liberties. The uprising began at dawn on Senate Square in St. Petersburg, where approximately 3,000 soldiers from the Moscow Regiment, the Grenadier Life Guards, and the Naval Guards gathered under Decembrist command. However, the conspiracy immediately encountered fatal problems. Prince Trubetskoy, designated as the provisional dictator, failed to appear at the square, leaving the rebels without unified leadership. Nicholas I's response demonstrated both courage and political acumen. Rather than immediately ordering an attack, he spent hours attempting to negotiate with the rebels, sending trusted intermediates, including the Metropolitan of St. Petersburg and the popular general Mikhail Miloradovich. When Miloradovich was shot and killed by the Decembrist officer Pyotr Kakovsky, Nicholas finally ordered artillery to fire on the square. The bombardment lasted only minutes, but its psychological impact was enormous. The sight of Russian soldiers firing on Russian soldiers in the heart of the capital shattered the traditional bonds between the monarchy and military that had sustained the Romanov dynasty for over 2 centuries. The nihilist terror, hunting the Tsar, 1860s-1881, The assassination of Alexander II on March 13, 1881, represented the culmination of a 20-year terrorist campaign that transformed the Russian imperial court into an armed fortress and the Tsar into a prisoner of his own security apparatus. The revolutionary organization People's Will, Narodnaya Volya, had declared war on the autocracy itself, targeting not just the emperor, but the entire system of imperial governance. The conspiracy against Alexander II was remarkable for its sophistication, persistence, and technological innovation. Led by figures like Andrei Gelyabov, Sofia Perovskaya, and Nikolai Kibalchich, People's Will combined the fanatical dedication of religious martyrs with the technical expertise of modern terrorists. They pioneered the use of dynamite in political assassination, conducted extensive surveillance operations, and maintained secure communication networks across the empire. The group's first major attempt occurred on November 19, 1879, when they detonated a mine under the imperial train near Moscow. The explosion destroyed several cars but missed the Tsar, who was traveling in a different carriage than expected. This failure led to increasingly desperate attempts, including the infiltration of the Winter Palace itself. Stepan Kalturin, a carpenter working on palace renovations, spent months smuggling dynamite into the building and storing it in his basement workshop directly below the imperial dining room. On February 17, 1880, he detonated approximately 40 pounds of explosives, killing 11 people and wounding 56 others. Alexander II survived only because the dinner had been delayed, placing him in a different part of the palace when the bomb exploded. The final successful assassination demonstrated the terrorists' evolution into a sophisticated urban guerrilla organization. On March 13, 1881, as Alexander II returned from a military review, Nikolai Rysakov threw a bomb at the imperial carriage, damaging it but leaving the Tsar unharmed. When Alexander stepped out to check on his wounded Cossack guards, Ignaty Grinovitsky approached with a second bomb, detonating it at point-blank range and killing both himself and the emperor. The assassination's immediate aftermath revealed the conspiracy's broader implications. Alexander II's death ended the era of liberal reform and ushered in a period of reaction under Alexander III that would persist until 1905. The terrorists had achieved their immediate goal of killing the Tsar, but their success ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the autocratic system. Rasputin, The Holy Devil's Palace Conspiracy, 1905 and 1916. The influence of Grigory Rasputin over the Romanov family represented a unique form of palace intrigue, a conspiracy of mysticism and manipulation that exploited the imperial family's desperation over their hemophiliac son, Alexei. Rasputin's presence at court created a parallel power structure that undermined traditional governmental authority and provided ammunition for the dynasty's enemies. Rasputin's initial introduction to the imperial family in 1905 came through a network of mystically inclined aristocrats, including the Montenegrin princesses Milica and Anastasia, who had cultivated relationships with various holy men and spiritualists. His apparent ability to help control Alexei's bleeding episodes made him indispensable to Empress Alexandra, who became convinced that Rasputin was divinely sent to preserve her son's life. The Holy Devil's influence extended far beyond medical intervention. By 1911, Rasputin was regularly consulting on governmental appointments, military strategy, and foreign policy. His recommendations led to the dismissal of competent ministers and their replacement with his protégés, creating a shadow administration that operated through personal loyalty rather than institutional competence. The most damaging example of Rasputin's political interference occurred during World War I, when his opposition to the conflict influenced the Empress's attitude toward military strategy and diplomatic negotiations. His famous telegram to Nicholas II in 1914, warning that war would mean the end of Russia and yourselves, demonstrated his understanding of the dynasty's vulnerability, but his continued meddling in military affairs undermined public confidence in the government's competence. Rasputin's assassination on December 30th, 1916, was orchestrated by a group of aristocrats led by Prince Felix Yusupov, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, and Vladimir Purishkevich, a right-wing politician. Their conspiracy was motivated by genuine patriotic concern about Rasputin's influence on wartime policy, but their methods revealed the complete breakdown of normal governmental authority. The murder itself became legendary for its apparent difficulty. According to Yusupov's account, Rasputin consumed enough cyanide to kill several men without apparent effect, was shot multiple times, beaten with a club, and finally drowned in the Neva River. While medical experts question the accuracy of these details, the story's persistence reflects the mythical status Rasputin had achieved in Russian popular consciousness. The Vinyl Conspiracy, July 1918, the execution of Nicholas II and his family in Ekaterinburg on July 17, 1918, represented the ultimate palace conspiracy, the systematic elimination of an entire dynasty by revolutionary forces determined to prevent any possibility of monarchist restoration. The Bolshevik decision to murder not just the former emperor but his wife, children and servants demonstrated their understanding that the Romanov mystique could survive individual deaths, but not dynastic extinction. The conspiracy was directed from Moscow by Vladimir Lenin and Yakov Sverdlov, who recognized that the approaching Czechoslovak Legion and White Army forces made the Romanovs' continued existence a strategic liability. Local Bolshevik leader Yakov Yurovsky was selected to command the execution squad, chosen for his reliability and lack of sentimental attachment to the imperial family. The murder was planned with careful attention to eliminating evidence and preventing the creation of martyrs or relics. The family was awakened after midnight and told they were being moved for their safety, a deception that prevented resistance or dramatic final statements. In the basement of the Ipatiev house, Yurovsky read a brief statement announcing their execution before ordering his men to fire. The immediate aftermath revealed the conspiracy's thoroughness. The bodies were transported to an abandoned mine shaft, where they were burned with gasoline and sulfuric acid, then buried in unmarked graves. Personal belongings were destroyed or scattered, and the execution squad was sworn to secrecy under threat of death. The Bolsheviks initially denied responsibility for the murders, claiming that local authorities had acted without authorization. This deception reflected their understanding that the executions, while politically necessary, were morally indefensible and potentially damaging to their international reputation. The curse fulfilled. The Romanov dynasty's violent end fulfilled a pattern of conspiracy and bloodshed that had characterized Russian imperial politics for over a century. Each generation had witnessed palace coups, assassination attempts, and revolutionary violence, creating a culture where political change was inevitably associated with personal destruction. The dynasty's inability to adapt to changing political circumstances, combined with their reliance on personal loyalty rather than institutional legitimacy, made them vulnerable to the very forces they had traditionally used to maintain power. The palace conspiracies that had once served to eliminate individual threats ultimately created the conditions for systemic collapse. The Romanov tragedy demonstrated how palace intrigue, when divorced from broader social and political reform, becomes a form of collective suicide. Their century of blood ended not with the triumph of any particular conspiracy, but with the complete rejection of the system that had made such conspiracies necessary and inevitable. The legacy of Romanov palace politics influenced Russian political culture well beyond 1918, establishing patterns of personal rule, institutional weakness, and violent succession that would characterize Soviet and post-Soviet governance. The palace had become the state, and when the palace fell, the entire edifice of traditional Russian authority collapsed with it.